You want to know the truth? The day I signed the papers on the house in Naples, the one with the dock and the pool nobody ever swam in, I had a retirement plan. A good one. I'd run the numbers 100 times. I knew exactly what I'd be doing at 65. I'd be playing golf on Tuesdays, lunch at the club on Thursdays, and I'd be alone. Quietly, comfortably, predictably alone. That was the plan. I just didn't know it. I'm Russ Hartline. You might have heard the first part of this story. The part about the boat dealerships, the millions, the big house, the silence. But you haven't heard what happened when I threw the whole plan out the window and married a Filipina at 65. Let me tell you, there's no spreadsheet for this. I got to Darwin in 2021. I was 63, hollowed out, just going through the motions. My wife Diane had been gone a year, and I was a ghost in my own life. Edwin, my old parts manager, he called me and said, "Boss, you come here, you sit on the beach, you forget your troubles." So I came. 2 weeks turned into a month, and a month turned into a permanent move. I sold the big house. I gave away the German car, and I built a modest little place on the black sand. I figured that was it. That was my retirement. I'd watch the boats come in, fix a few engines, and slowly, quietly, turn to dust in paradise. And then I met Lorna. Lorna. I want to tell you about the first time I saw her. It's the kind of thing that sounds like a bad country song, but I swear it's the truth. It was a Wednesday. The market in Malatap, down the coast. The place is chaos. Women selling fish, men hauling goats, kids running everywhere. I was standing there, lost as usual, trying to buy something for dinner. And this voice says to me, "You look like a man who doesn't know what he wants." I turned around, and there she was. A woman my age, maybe a little younger, with a basket of calamansi on her hip, and this smile. Not a polite smile. Not a customer service smile. This was the kind of smile that told you she knew exactly what you were thinking, and she found it amusing. I said, "I know exactly what I want. I want the fish that's freshest, and the woman who'll stop making fun of me." She laughed. And that laugh, I swear, that laugh was like the first warm day after a long winter. I hadn't heard a sound like that in years. Her name was Lorna. She was a widow, just like me. Her husband had passed about 5 years earlier. She had 2 grown daughters, one in Manila, one in Cebu. She sold fruit at the market and ran a little eatery on the side. Nothing fancy. A few plastic tables, a charcoal grill, and the best dang kinilaw I've ever eaten. That first conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it was enough. Enough that I went back the next Wednesday, and the Wednesday after that. And pretty soon, I was finding excuses to be in Malatap every single day. Here's what I didn't plan for. I didn't plan for the feeling of having someone to cook for. I didn't plan for the way she'd look at me when I butchered a sentence in Cebuano, like I was the most entertaining thing she'd seen all week. I didn't plan for the way my heart would do a little jump when she'd hand me a plate and say, "Eat, skinny." I was 220 pounds, and she called me skinny. She lived in a little concrete house up the road from the beach. Her house was smaller than my bedroom in Naples, and the roof leaked in the rainy season. But she'd sit on her porch in the evenings, shelling beans or mending a dress, and I'd sit with her, and we'd talk. About nothing. About everything. She'd tell me about her husband, a fisherman who died of a fever that a simple antibiotic would have cured. She'd tell me about the years she spent raising her girls alone, scraping together money by selling anything she could cook or grow. She told me about the time a typhoon took the roof off her house, and her neighbors had it patched before the sun went down. And I'd tell her about Diane, about the silence in the big house, about the men comparing surgeries at the country club. And she'd listen. Not the way people listen when they're waiting for their turn to talk. The way someone listens when they actually care. Now, I want to be honest with you. People talk about marrying a Filipina like it's some kind of transactional thing. An old guy, a younger woman, a green card. I've seen it. I've seen the 70-year-old men with the 25-year-old girlfriends. I've seen the disaster stories. The guys who get bled dry by a family they barely know. The guys who end up broke and alone in a foreign country because they bought something instead of building something. That's not what this was. Lorna was 59 when we met. I was 64. We were both old enough to know better. We were both widowed. We'd both lost someone we loved. And neither of us was looking for a transaction. We got married on the beach, 2022. It was a small thing. Edwin and Marisol, Thibaut and his family. The whole barangay, really. They decorated the little chapel down by the water with flowers and bamboo. Lorna wore a simple white dress. I wore a barong, this fancy embroidered shirt that Edwin insisted on. I looked like a waiter, but she loved it. And I'll tell you what I said to her when we stood there, two old widows making a new start. I said, Lorna, I spent my whole life building things that didn't matter. I spent the last few years learning that. And the only thing I want to build now is a life with you. She cried. I cried. I hadn't cried like that since Diane died. It was the good kind of crying, the kind that heals. Then came the family. Now I'm a practical man. I built a company. I know how to plan. But I did not plan for the sheer, overwhelming avalanche of Lorna's family. And let me tell you, in the Philippines, when you marry a woman, you marry everyone who shares her blood. Cousins, aunts, uncles, nephews, the neighbor who's basically family, the kid who calls her Tita, even though nobody's sure how they're related. When Lorna's youngest daughter came home from Cebu to meet me, I thought, okay, this is the big test. Her name was Grace. She was a nurse, sharp as a tack, and she looked at me like I was a specimen under glass. She grilled me about my intentions, my health, my finances, all the things a good daughter should ask. She watched me for 3 days like a hawk. And then, on the third night, she said something to Lorna in Cebuano that I didn't understand. Lorna laughed, and Grace looked at me and said, "Okay, Papa, you can stay." She called me Papa. That was the moment, I think. The moment I got adopted into the whole thing. Lorna's older daughter, Angie, she lives in Manila with her husband and 3 kids. She was a little more suspicious of me at first, but a few months later, we flew up to Manila for Christmas. I walked into their apartment, this tiny place with bunk beds in the living room and a kitchen the size of a closet. And Angie says to me, "Welcome to our home. Not the apartment, not our place, our home." That night, we sang karaoke until 2 in the morning. Angie's husband, a small, very serious man named June, showed me how to cook the lechon. And Lorna's little grandson, a boy of about 6 named Miggy, climbed into my lap and fell asleep on me. I sat there, this old American with a sleeping kid in his arms, looking at my new family. And I thought, this is what I bought with 40 years of climbing. This is the return on investment. But I want to be honest with you. This isn't a fantasy. There's a reason the phrase, "You don't just marry a Filipina, you marry her family," is a cliché. Because it's true. And some of the family members are challenging. There's a cousin, let's call him Jomar. Jomar is a charmer. Always has a business idea. Always needs capital. Just a little loan, Boss Russ. A few thousand pesos. I'm going to start a pig farm. I'm going to open a sari-sari store. I'm going to buy a tricycle. I gave him money once. Twice. Then I started to understand that Jomar didn't have a business. He had a proposition. He had a way of making his problems my problems. And I got scammed early on. A little. A few $100s. By a sad story that turned out to be a fabrication. I felt like an idiot. But here's what I learned. That's not a Philippines thing. That's a money thing. In Florida, I got taken for a lot more than a few $100s by men in suits. Men with offices and titles. At least Jomar had the decency to look me in the eye while he was doing it. Lorna taught me how to handle it. She said, "Russ, you are a generous man. That's good. That's why I married you. But you must be smart. The family will test you. They will see if you are kind or if you are weak. There is a difference." So I started setting boundaries. I told Jomar and the others, "I will help you, but I will not fund you. I'll help you write a plan. I'll help you think through the steps. But the money is yours. You find it. You earn it. You work for it." You know what happened? Most of them stopped asking. And the few who kept coming, who actually showed up with a plan, they were the ones I helped. And those businesses, small as they worked. Because they earned them. Here's the part of the story that really surprised me. How much Lorna changed my life. Not the big obvious changes, but the little ones. I used to wake up at 5 a.m. out of habit. 40 years of opening dealerships. I'd have nothing to do, and nobody who needed me to do it. Lorna changed that. She wakes up at 4, because that's when her body clock tells her to. And she makes coffee. Strong, sweet, dark coffee. And she sits on the porch with me, just watching the sky lighten over the sea. She makes me eat breakfast. I used to stand up at the counter in Naples and eat cereal. Now she makes garlic rice and fried fish and eggs, and this little tomato salad she learned from her mother. And she sits across from me and she says, "Eat, you're too skinny." I'm 220 pounds, and she still calls me skinny.